few weeks ago, we were going over the state of every position within the Carolina Hurricanes themselves. But this time on the Friday episode, it's nothing but the goaltenders. And we're not talking just Hurricanes. We're talking the entire organization looking at the depth from Carolina to Chicago to even Greensboro. So stick around as we're doing a Goalie Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin, the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Argus, also the co-host of the Search Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my dudes here at Locked On Hurricanes. On the Friday edition of the pod, as you heard at the start of the show, it's nothing but the goalies. It is the goalies show to wrap up the week as we head into the weekend. We're going to look at the Carolina Hurricanes and Frederik, Andersen Kochetkov, looking at the Chicago Wolves with Cayden, Primeau, and Amir, Miftakov, and then Nikita, Quapp, and Ruslan, Khazheyev down there in the ECHL with the Greensboro Gargoyles. So, starting off with the show, we're going to begin in the NHL and work our way down the system tree within the organization. We're going, with the Hurricanes, down to the Chicago Wolves, and then finishing up with the Gargoyles. Now, we all know Frederik Andersen last year with the Canes, 22 games played, 13-8-1 record, and 250 goals against, an .899 save percentage, did have a shutout and did have an assist. And then going to the playoffs, he had 8 wins in 13 games, 2 shutouts, a .202 goals against, and a .907 save percentage. And then looking over at Pyotr Kochetkov, and his numbers real quick, 47 games played, 27, 16-3 with a .260 goals against average, and .898 save, 2 shutouts, and had 3 assists in the regular season. Then looking at the playoffs, Pyotr played in 4 games, had a win, a .360 goes against, and an .855 save percentage. Now, you kind of heard me talk about when we did the state of the goaltending, mainly for the Carolina Hurricanes, but like I said, this is an entire goalies from top to bottom. In terms of the depth, it's going to be a no-brainer that these two are going to be the tandem for the Carolina Hurricanes. It just depends on who's the 1A and the 1B. I know with how the fact of how Freddie played last year with the 22 games that he was in, because he did miss a lot of time due to getting a knee surgery. He missed a lot of the regular season once again. He's missed over 70 games the last 2 years, but every time he comes back, he is a top 10 goalie within the league and absolutely lights out netminder. And in the playoffs, there was a chance that if the Hurricanes continue their progression through the playoffs and got to the Cup final and however that worked out, like Andersen, for probably the first 2 rounds at least, was in Vezina talks. Like he was a sub 2 goals against. His save percentage was in the high 9, like 10s, almost mainly in the 920s for the most part. And you thought, okay, maybe Andersen could be talking Vezina. And of course, the Eastern Conference final happened, and the Florida Panthers just went back to back. So it is what it is. But then you look at Pyotr Kochetkov. This guy's won 50 games the last 2 seasons for the Carolina Hurricanes. Yeah, the goals against and the save percentage aren't great. It is over 2.6. It is a sub 9. And you guys heard me talk about this since the season ended. The last 9 games, and Rod Brind'Amour even said it too on Kane's Corner, the last 9 games of the regular season, the team packed it in. They were resting guys, and they were trying to get ready for the playoffs. So you could tell like they weren't really going 100%. So some of these numbers for Pyotr and Freddie, you guys kind of have to take with a grain of salt, because Rod did say, hey, we kind of packed it in. So if you want to hear that, go over and check out Kane's Corner. But that's why I say don't look at those numbers and be like, oh, well, he had a bad season. Well, no, he had a pretty good season overall. It's just the team kind of in front of him struggled for the most part. And ever since I think that LA Kings game, Pyotr kind of was a little bit up and down. But I mean, any goalie who gets shelled like that and you can't come out of it, and it seemed like you get every time you try to make a save, it didn't work. yeah, that's kind of gonna rattle you a little bit. But if it's not for Pyotr Kochetkov and how he played the last few seasons, like what are you looking at in terms of the Carolina Hurricanes with the playoffs? I think, starting off the year 14-4, the first 18 games does kind of give you a big, cushion to deal with. But, what happens if Kochetkov's not doing his thing in the net and, you have Andersen who's out that you're relying on Tokarski and Spencer Martin? I think the Hurricanes would have to make a move for a goaltender sooner rather than later in the regular season with Freddie out and if Pyotr wasn't doing his thing. But he did. He held it down. And I think overall, this is going to be a huge season for Kochetkov to be, are you going to be our goalie of the future? Are you going to be the 1A of the future? Or, do we got to look somewhere else? With Andersen, is this potentially his last year with the Canes? Because this is he had a 2-year deal. He went through that and they brought him back for one more season. And of course they kind of had to, because if you looked at the goalie market this past offseason, not the strongest. Billy Husso, maybe. Other than that, there was not a lot of guys available. Anton Forsberg. I know there's a lot of talks of like maybe John Gibson being in a trade, but he goes to Detroit. And honestly, I still don't know if I still think John Gibson was the guy. It doesn't make sense for the Hurricanes to go trade for him because, yeah, he's behind a bad Ducks team, but I just never felt like Gibson would have been the end-all be-all fix-it guy for the Canes this upcoming season. Of course, who knows how it works for him in Detroit, but I think the Hurricanes are in a good spot because Bleacher Report Open Ice ranked their goalie tandems for the 25-26 season, and they have the Hurricanes with Pyotr and Freddie at 11. I think that's a good spot for them. I would more so consider them maybe top 10. I would say probably 10 would have been a better spot for them, but 11th still isn't bad either when you look at goalie tandems. But when those two guys are on, they're pretty much locked in for the Canes, and it's just like I said, Freddie is dialed in and playing and actually available. And then he's definitely a top 10 goalie in the league. And I think Pyotr Kochetkov, when he's locked in as well, I think he's a really good goalie. I think he's more than a bona fide 1A, almost pushing that one spot really. But there's still some things to work on. But you've seen throughout the offseason that Kochetkov has kind of mentally prepared himself a lot more, and you see that maturity level that went through this past season with Paul Schoenfelder and the coaching staff, and then throughout the games you can see him trying to find that middle line of being calm, cool, collected, maybe staying in your crease, not be as aggressive as you are, but still maintain that aggressiveness, because Rod even said they like him being aggressive. It's just trying to pick your moments to do that. So I think you see the maturity of Kochetkov. It's just the big question is Andersen going to be healthy this season? Because like I said, he's missed the last 2 seasons. He's missed a lot of games the last 2 seasons. We're talking 70 games at least. And there's nothing you can do with a blood clotting issue. That's just that's a tough thing to deal with. And glad that he recovered and came back when the Hurricanes needed him. And last year he had his knee surgery. So it's just, is he going to be healthy? But at least now the Hurricanes have their number 3 goalie, which we'll talk about in segment 2. But that's kind of the big question is Andersen going to be healthy? That's kind of what they're really hoping for, because if you have Andersen being healthy all season, then you're in a good spot with your tandem to where you can have a guy who can be hot for a little bit, right, with him as your number 1 and switch to the other guy, or maybe you do that on-off like we've seen at the back half of the season the last couple of years. You just go with a swap system. I know with a lot of the back-to-backs they're going to have to do that, but there's at least more avenues. If Andersen's healthy the whole season and plays more than just 20-something odd games, for the season. So that's just going to be the bigger question, I think. It's just, is Andersen's availability going to give him the opportunity to be there? That's kind of what the big thing is. But if you look at the Hurricanes and where they are right now, I think they're fine in the goaltending department. Like I said, you get Andersen going into his 1-year contract with the Canes. After that, who really knows? Maybe they look at the goalie market next season. And he got Kochetkov entering year 3 of his 4-year deal. It's only $2 million. That's not bad at all. But I think this is I wouldn't say it's the year to get it figured out, or it's like this is your make or break season. But I think this is a very important season for Kochetkov because you're going into the second to last year of your 4-year contract. You really have to prove yourself being the 1A, because next offseason, the Hurricanes can go and get their number 1 guy if they really want to, or their upgrade 1A if they don't think Kochetkov's that. So this is going to be a big question, but I have a lot of faith in these guys of Andersen and Kochetkov. If Andersen stays healthy and Kochetkov could be that guy before the LA Kings game where he was just absolutely on it, I think the Hurricanes are in a perfect spot with their net line. And I think they're more than just 11th in the league. I think you're looking at possibly a top 10, maybe reaching top 5 tandem within the NHL. So time will tell, but that's where we're kind of starting off with the goalie episode, looking at the depth. It's going to be Andersen. It could be Kochetkov. It's just where is the Hurricanes going with their 1A and their 1B? Is it Andersen 1 or is Kochetkov, or is it the A for Andersen, Kochetkov's the B, or is Kochetkov the 1A compared to Andersen's 1B? Only time will tell. But we did talk about their third netminder, and we're going to talk about him and the guy he's going to be tandeming with in Chicago. So stick around. I'll talk about that here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. Are you watching the Eagles? Are you watching the Panthers? Are you just watching a random game between the Niners and the Rams? There's so much you can watch and a lot that you can make your bets on. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we started with the Carolina Hurricanes and Frederik Andersen and Pyotr Kochetkov. Now we're going to the Chicago Wolves and talking about Cayden Primeau and Amir Miftakov. Now, Cayden Primeau was acquired by the Hurricanes this past offseason in a trade with the Montreal Canadiens for a 2026 7th-round pick. That's pretty much it. Not bad at all. So with the Canadiens last season, played 11 games, had a .470 goals against, and an .836 save percentage with a 2-3-1 record. Now, what really stood out, I think, why the Carolina Hurricanes really liked about Primeau was when he was the Laval Rocket of the AHL, 26 games, a 196 goals against, a 927 save percentage, 2 shutouts, and his record 21-2-3, probably his best ever record it is his best record in the AHL, and probably one of the best in the very long time when it comes to the American. Now in the playoffs, 8 games, 327 goals against, an 878 save percentage. Did have a shutout, but went 3-4 in the playoffs. Now, he did play, 23 games for the Canadiens back in 23-24, had 23 games, a 299 goals against, a 910 save percentage, 2 shutouts, but was 8-9-4. So even with the Canadiens, he does have some experience with them. Some of the numbers aren't really the greatest, but if you're talking like the 2021 Canadiens, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, there's a lot of wasn't a lot of great Montreal Canadiens teams ahead of him playing in front of him for a lot of those seasons. And even this, past year, his numbers weren't great, but it's kind of one of those, what can you really do with the Canadiens for the most part? They were kind of an up and down team. They did make the playoffs, but it didn't really last very long for them. But with Laval, though, he was a dynamo for those guys. Like I said, 26 starts, you have a sub-2 goals against, a 920 save percentage, and a 21-2-3 record. I don't know how you're not excited for that. And I think for the Hurricanes we're looking at, I think they knew that they needed a bona fide goalie that they needed as their number 3. Nothing against Spencer Martin or nothing against, Dustin Dukarski, but they needed a guy who had a lot of runway or at least a decent amount of NHL experience. Still a young guy, but someone they can really rely on as a number 3 goalie. And I think that's what Cayden Primeau brings in that aspect when you look at a guy who's, someone that's going to be very important for the Hurricanes. And I think, you're looking at the Chicago Wolves, you're going to have a guy who's 26, a little bit high. He's a year older than Kochetkov, but like I said, someone who's got a lot of time in the National League, and he's your third netminder essentially. So if anything does happen to Andersen, knock on wood that nothing does, you can still rely on Cayden Primeau to be that guy. And in that too, you have Amir Miftakov, 25 years old, another Russian goalie. The Hurricanes love their Russian goalies. He wasn't originally a sixth-round draft pick back in 2020 by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Hurricanes signed to the contract, and he did have some time in North American hockey. Of course, it wasn't very long. It was only the 21-22 season where he was with the Syracuse Crunch. 22 games, a 303 goals against, an 891 save percentage, a shutout, a 7-8-4 record. And then he played with the Orlando Solar Bears of the ECHL, 5 games, a 223 goals against, a 920 save percentage with a 2-3 record. Goes back to the KHL, plays with a.k.a. Bars Cayden over the last few years. Did play some, KHL, played a little bit of VHL back in 23-24. But this past season, he was with a.k.a. Bars Cayden again of the Continental Hockey League. And of course, the big thing is, take goalie numbers with a grain of salt in the KHL because they're really inflated with the talent, and goalies seem a little bit better in the league. But overall, though, 30 games, a 2.18 goals against, a 927 save percentage, 4 shutouts. But here's the kicker, though. His record, 13-11-3, did play in 2 playoff games, had a 714 save percentage, a 368 goals against, but an 0-1 record. Take the playoff number out of there. I mean, it sounded like Bars Cayden, which just wasn't really a great team for the most part, because you look at his goalie numbers, and like I said a little bit ago, they might seem inflated. The KHL, it's very different when it comes to goalie numbers and stuff like that, but you're still talking about a guy who's 25, who last year played 3 games in the KHL, didn't go sent down into the Russian minor leagues. 30 games, he had a 2.18 goals against. That's still dang pretty good when you're talking about the second best hockey league in all of the world in the KHL. Still had an upper 920 save percentage, and he still had 4 shutouts. The record isn't great at 13-11-3, but it goes and talks about what the team was in front of him, where he just wasn't getting goal support. If you have 4 shutouts and you're giving up a sub 2.2 goals against, and your save percentage is almost dang near 0.93, you're a good goalie. It's just the team in front of you isn't that great. And you saw his playoff numbers, only 2 games. Yeah, the save percentage wasn't great, but how was the team in front of him playing? Were they just seeing him getting peppered for those 2 games? And it's just, what can you do there? It's what it seems like, but you look at the numbers, it's still dang pretty good. And I know I've said it a couple times already, but it bears repeating. Numbers might be a little bit inflated, but even then, you can't just scoff at a sub 2.2 goals against. You can't scoff at almost a 0.930. He still had 4 shutouts in 30 games played in the net in the KHL at 25. Yeah, like I said, his record's 13-11. That just shows you that the team in front of him wasn't that good. They were okay at best. So when you look at him as a possible 4th goalie, maybe, or if he's playing really well in Chicago, maybe he becomes the 3. Either way, if it is Chicago Wolves right now, you're on paper looking at, oh my gosh, we got a 26-year-old Cayden Primeau who just had a huge season with Laval Rocky. You basically stole a guy essentially out of the Eastern Conference. You throw him in the Central Division, where you got to deal with the Texas Stars, the Milwaukee Admirals, the Grand Rapids, all those guys. You're dealing with a lot of Central Division teams. And you add Cayden Primeau, who's 26, who just killed it for the Laval Rocket. And then you add a Russian netminder, Amir Miftakov, who's coming off of 4 shutouts in 30 games, a 2.18 goals against, and a 927 save percentage. You have a pretty dang good tandem. So if you're Cam Abbott and his staff, you're like, okay, this is great. Nothing against Spencer Martin And nothing against Dustin Tokarski, but you got two guys that are 25 and 26, had really good seasons with their respective teams last year, and now on the same tandem. In Chicago, you're looking great. If you're the Carolina Hurricanes, if you feel good about one of these guys having to come up in case someone's hurt or whatever reason, you are in a good spot with either Primeau or Miftakov coming up. So I think in terms of reassuring or, getting the better water in the well, or however you want to put it, they replenished that well very well with these two guys. I'm excited to see what, Miftakov and Cayden Primeau could do for the Wolves. And if they have to come up, I think you feel pretty good about yourselves of having a good third goalie, even a good fourth goalie to have if you need them. So only time will tell. But honestly, Primeau and Miftakov, I feel pretty good about those two guys being with the Chicago Wolves. So we talked about the NHL, we talked about the AHL. Now we're going to move on to the ECHL, looking at the Greensboro Gargoyles in their first year of existence and who their tandem might be. Stick around. We'll talk about it here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we talked about the Hurricanes, we talked about the Wolves. Now let's talk about the Greensboro Gargoyles. Now, as of right now, the Gargoyles don't have any of their goalies signed. All they have right now is mainly forwards signed to the roster for the 25-26 season. The Hurricanes do have Nikita Quapp and Ruslan Khazheyev signed to the signed under contract, but we're not sure if they're going to be in Greensboro. I think it would make sense to have them in Greensboro because you want them kind of close. You want them kind of, going through the system and stuff like that. But as of right now, the only thing that we know of is that they're going to the prospect showcase. That's going to go from the 12th through the 15th because you guys heard me talk about it, last week. We were going through all the news that was going on with, last week being crazy with what the Hurricanes are dropping of their multitude of news, the previous week. But we know Quapp and Khazheyev are going to the showcase down there in Florida. Past that, we're not sure. But as of now, for what they're saying on Elite Prospects, Quapp is going to the DEL Second League, which is basically the minor leagues of the Dutch or the German league. And it's with Esperiton Kremtashu. I am so sorry. I butchered the snot out of that. My German's okay. My German is not that good with this team. But according to what they're saying on Elite Prospects, even though he is signed, Quapp looks like he's going to the Dell Second League after playing for Dusseldorf in the DL last year. 9 games of 408 goals against, an 870 save percentage, and he was 0-5. Before that, he was with Eisbären Berlin in the DEL, only played 2 games, was a 1-1 record in the 818 save percentage of 362 goals against. He was loaned to Leicester Vush in the Dell Second League back in 23-24, 26 games, a 263 goals against, a 920 save, 11-14 was his record. Honestly, not bad numbers. It's just the team in front of it, even in the second German league, wasn't really great because if you put up a 263 goals against and a 920 save, but have 11-14 record, you're just not getting any goalie support. And like I said, last season, he played 9 games for Dusseldorf. That was it. It looks like he's possibly signed for the Dell Second League, but if I'm the Hurricanes and I just signed him on and we got him going to the prospect showcase, I would say more than anything else, just get him over and play. Just let him play with the Gargoyles, because if you wanted to kind of figure it out and be the goalie that they kind of draft him for, I think you guys need to move him up the system, or at least give him to North America to get used to the ice, because it just seems like he's just in a tight spot, just kind of bouncing around the German top flight, which is the Dell, and you got him in the Dell Second League and not really doing a whole lot, and you're not really putting him in front of behind good teams. If you want to get better, I think you just have to get him over to the ECHL, and of course, it depends what the Gargoyles want to do. Are they just going to bring their own guys in, or are the Hurricanes going to bring their guys into the system? as of right now, it looks like he's set for the Dell second. I would personally put him in the ECHL. Just get him on North American ice. Get him behind a team that, it's their inaugural season with, do you want him just kind of meddling around a German second league team, or do you want to try to get him in North America, put him on the North American ice and see what he can do? Because he's just been in Germany the whole time. If you want him to get better, I think you just got to put him in a spot where it might make more sense. Now, with Khazheyev, he did play 20 games last year with the Chicago Wolves, of course, having to, go up and down a lot, especially with, Spencer Martin and Dustin Tokarski having to go up to the Canes. 20 games, a 349 goals against, an 876 save percentage, a 5-13 record with the Wolves. Not the greatest, especially where the Wolves were last year. And he played one game with the Bloomington Bison of the ECHL. Of course, they're the Rangers' actual affiliate, but there was a handshake agreement for the Hurricanes to send some of their guys there. Khazheyev did 665 goals against, an 800 save, 0-1 record. Now, as of now, it looks like he's probably going to be with the Chicago Wolves in terms of what his contract is. I just don't see where the Wolves would go with 3 netminders right now, especially with the fact that you're going to have Primeau and Miftakov there. I just don't know how much they want to kind of rotate goalies. Now, I could see Khazheyev probably playing with the Chicago Wolves if one of those 2 other guys have to get moved up. But you're talking about his second season in North America after playing Russian junior hockey back in 23-24 between the VCHL and the MHL, 29 games total. And before that, it was mainly MHL. And it's just, if you want to get Khazheyev to get, acclimated, I guess, more and get his numbers up, I think having him as a third netminder in the AHL probably won't really do a whole lot for him, in my opinion. If you want to get him some ice time, it might be better to have him in Greensboro. Just the same thing with Nikita Quapp. Quapp has gotten really not a lot of decent help in front of him, bouncing up and down the German top flight in the German second league, and the same thing with Khazheyev. You put him in 20 games of the Wolves, numbers weren't really that great. You already got Primeau, who's coming off a huge season for Laval. You got Miftakov, who just came off a pretty decent season, I think a really good season over there in the KHL. Why would you want to sit Khazheyev between 2 guys that are probably going to take more of your starts? If you need him, bring him up. If one of those guys get called up to the Canes, then okay, boom, there you go. There's Khazheyev. You have him there. So I think that would make a lot more sense if you have Khazheyev and even Quapp down in Greensboro. It's like, hey, we're going to get you guys, not as much stress, not a lot of, hey, we need you to do this. It's like, no, you're the 5th and 6th goalies in the system. Just go to Greensboro. You're still close enough for the Hurricanes where they can come watch you, but you don't have the stress. You don't have all the extra pressure of like, you need to be ready right now if we need to call you up to the big team. No, you got the AHL. You got the AHL as that next step, and you're not having to just sit behind 2 other goalies if you're in the American League, or you're playing behind an okay middle of the road team in Germany. But you're at least with the ECHL. Yeah, you're going to have a team who's in their inaugural season. Who knows how it's going to go, but at least you're going to get the proper ice time. At least you're going to get a team ahead of you that might give you more opportunities, a better chance to have, get your numbers up, give you that, maybe that refresh that you need. Like I said, obviously their contract situation, I don't know what the contract situations look like. Of course, we're going off of what Elite Prospect says. So as of right now, I don't know if these guys are going to be in Greensboro, but if you ask me, I think those are the probably the best options if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, if you want those guys in North America playing with, on teams that might give you more ice time. Of course, like I said, Khazheyev is, as they're saying on Elite Prospects, he's going to be playing with the Wolves. I don't know what that playing time looks like. And it looks like Quapp is going to be over there in Germany in the second league again. Is that team going to help support him? And as of right now, the Gargoyles have no goalies in their system signed. So they might be going with someone else who's just their guys just in the ECHL. So who really knows? But in terms of the Hurricanes' depth, in terms of what Puckpedia says, they have 4 goalies in the minors signed. It's Primeau, Miftakov, Quapp, and Khazheyev. Khazheyev might be in Chicago. Who knows? And Quapp is in Germany. So if you're looking at your 5th and 6th netminders, one is playing third fiddle. Unfortunately, I hate to say it like that, but he's going to be probably playing as your number 3 goalie in Chicago. And your other goalie that you have signed, who you just signed to a deal, is in the German second league, and you're kind of hoping that he has a bounce back. So who really knows? But that's where you're kind of looking at with your 5 and 6. I would personally put them in Greensboro and just give them ice time. But that's just me. What do I know? But I guess we'll see how that goes for those guys. But we now know what the kind of the Hurricanes goalie depth is. In Carolina, obviously it's Andersen Kochetkov. In Chicago, it's going to be Primeau Miftakov. For me, that's the 1-2 punch. You might have Khazheyev be the third. So he's your 5th netminder, and I think Nikita Quapp, with him being over there in Germany, he's your 6th. Unless something changes there, I still think he's your 6th. But that's what we're looking at right now. Let me know in the comments if you're on YouTube. What do you think about the goalie depth? And how do you feel about it going into the 25-26 season? For me, I feel pretty good where the Hurricanes are at. I think they replenished the well of what was almost becoming a dry spot in the system with just their goalie depth in general. I think they did a pretty good job overall. I'm curious to see where these guys are going to be playing this upcoming season and will it benefit them going into the future, but only time will tell. But until then, guys, this is the Friday episode of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen of the day. For your second lesson, check out the Locked On ECHL podcast where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On ECHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneShoeZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Moore. You can find all of my link trees in my bios, especially if you want to check out all my written content at thehockeywriters.com. I've been putting out a lot of stuff recently, so make sure to go check that out. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. If you want to check out Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up so you know if you like the show as well. Share with all their Keniacs who become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. And one quick note, guys. We are going back to 5 days a week starting next Monday. Yep, so Monday through Friday, it is officially back. We are ramping back up for the season. But until next time, as always, let's go Canes.